Why would you do all this and expect nothing in return? You must be a spy. The Soviet interrogation officer thundered, his voice crashing like a storm against the calm resolve of Raoul Wallenberg. But Wallenberg was no spy. He was a hero. This is the little-known story of a man whose bravery saved thousands from the horrors of the Holocaust. To understand how Raoul Wallenberg became the man willing to risk everything for strangers, we must first look back to a defining moment in his childhood. When Raoul Wallenberg was just a few years old, he witnessed something no child should ever have to see: the tears of his mother, Marge. They were in the family home in Kapstadt, an island just outside Stockholm. Despite the beauty surrounding him, the lush greenery and large verandas adorned with hanging plants, Raoul's world felt smaller that day, overshadowed by his mother's sadness. As Raoul saw his mother cry, the warmth of the home faded. He may not have fully understood why his mother was hurting. She was still grieving the loss of her husband, who had died a few months before he was born. But Raoul knew enough to feel it deeply. His small hand rested on her shoulder. "We have to be happy anyway," he said softly, his voice carrying more strength than one might expect from a child. It wasn't just an attempt to cheer her up. It was a glimpse of the person Raoul would become, someone who believed in hope even when surrounded by sorrow. As Raoul grew, his keen intellect began to shine. When he was 9, he had devoured the Nordic Encyclopedia. His grandfather, an influential man himself, was asking the young boy for advice on business matters. Raoul soon spoke German and French, in addition to Swedish and English. But this precociousness came with its own vulnerabilities. In high school, while most boys were chatting about sports or weekend plans, Raoul was talking to his dates about the League of Nations and Sweden's responsibilities to the world. Unsurprisingly, a walking encyclopedia isn't the most popular person at parties. Like many in his family, Raoul set his sights on the land of apple pie and baseball, America. He studied architecture at the University of Michigan. During vacations, he hitchhiked across the country, becoming more willing to leap into the unknown and adapt to unpredictable situations. After graduating, Raoul bounced around Europe and the Middle East like a restless tourist with too many career options, trying out different apprenticeships but never quite finding the one. But he soaked up knowledge wherever he went, like a sponge in a whirl of opportunity. Eventually, he landed back in Sweden, running the foreign division of the Central European Trading Company. A fancy title, sure, but still not the kind of calling that set his soul on fire. And soon, he would find it, but not in business. Raoul Wallenberg's search for purpose took a decisive turn in December 1942, as war clouds darkened Europe's skies. He was sitting in the theatre of the British Embassy in Stockholm, his sister Nina next to him. In the dim light, they watched the film Pimpernel Smith, the movie's hero, Horatio Smith, secretly rescued persecuted Germans from the Nazis. Raoul's heart raced. Each daring escape was like a call to arms. When the movie ended, Raoul turned to Nina and said, "I'd like to do this as well." It was no passing comment. The seeds of Raoul's destiny had been planted. Soon, news from Auschwitz began to trickle. Two escapees, Rudolf Verba and Fred Wetzler, published a harrowing report detailing the horrors of the Nazi extermination camp. The report landed in the hands of US President Roosevelt. He then tasked the newly formed War Refugee Board with finding a way to stop the genocide. The search for someone to spearhead a rescue mission led US official Ivar Olsen to Sweden, where he met with a relief committee of Swedish Jews. Among them was Kalman Lauer, who was also Raoul's boss. Lauer immediately thought of Raoul for the mission. Raoul's courage and intellect made him the perfect candidate to lead a rescue effort in Hungary, where thousands of Jews were being deported to their deaths. And Raoul had visited Budapest twice on business trips, as Kalman himself was unable to go due to Hungary's anti-Jewish laws. So Raoul knew the challenges that Hungary's Jews face. Unsurprisingly, Raoul readily agreed to take on the role when approached. But before he left, there was one last battle to be fought, not against the Nazis, but against the Swedish Foreign Ministry. The ministry didn't want to jeopardize trade with Germany and risk being dragged into the war. But Raoul fought hard for extraordinary authority for his mission. He won a free hand to save Jews. He also got written permission to use bribery, a controversial but vital tool in the effort to save lives. Raoul's determination wasn't just fueled by the pressing moral urgency of the Holocaust. There was a personal conviction that had been brewing since that fateful screening of Pimpernel Smith. Now, it was his turn to step into the role of the rescuer. With the mission approved, Raoul embarked on the journey that would define his life and forever alter the fate of tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews. But despite his brave run, Raoul knew the risk. He was heading into Nazi-controlled territory, with only his diplomatic immunity as a shield. Fear and doubt weighed on him. Yet, he pushed forward, driven by the simple truth that he could not look away from suffering. The man who once comforted his grieving mother with the words, "We have to be happy anyway," was about to face a world filled with unimaginable sorrow. But Raoul Wallenberg, as always, believed in hope, even when it seemed most elusive. On the morning of July 10, 1944, Raoul Wallenberg trudged up the hill leading to the Swedish embassy in Budapest. He saw a long line of desperate people. Jewish families, elderly men, frightened women clutching children, waiting, hoping for salvation from the looming threat of deportation to Auschwitz. The air was thick with fear, but Wallenberg could sense something else, the fragile glimmer of hope. They believed that somehow, this embassy, this place of neutrality, could protect them. Inside, Wallenberg was greeted by Pierre Unger, a Swedish diplomat who had been stationed in Budapest for some time. After exchanging brief introductions, they sat down to discuss the situation at hand. Unger explained, "Hungary has temporarily halted the deportation of Jews, but it's only a matter of time before the Germans force the Hungarian government to resume sending Jewish men, women, and children to the death camps." After a few moments of silence, Wallenberg leaned forward and said, "We need to issue Scrooge passes." Unger looked at him, intrigued but uncertain. Wallenberg continued, explaining that the Scrooge pass, meaning protective pass in German, would be a simple, easily recognizable document. It would be emblazoned with Sweden's colors and stamp, signaling that its bearer was under the Swedish government's protection. Unlike passports, which were slow to produce in large numbers, Scrooge passes could be printed quickly and handed out en masse. Deporting someone under Sweden's protection would spark an international incident, something even the Germans wanted to avoid. Without further delay, Unger agreed to Wallenberg's proposal. They printed thousands of Scrooge passes and began distributing them to those in the long, anxious lines outside the embassy. Scrooge passes landed in the hands of Marianne Lowy. She received passes for her family. When she showed those passes to the authorities, the Nazis released her father from a concentration camp. Wallenberg then told him to stay at a safe house, a house that was under the same protection as the Swedish embassy, having been purchased by Wallenberg with US funds. Thousands of others received Scrooge passes and stayed at safe houses as well. For Hungarian Jews, the Scrooge pass wasn't just a document, it was the symbol of hope and a gateway to freedom. And there was more reason to be hopeful. In August 1944, the tide of war had turned. The Soviet army had steamrolled into Hungary. Adolf Eichmann, chief administrator of the Holocaust, received an order from his superior, Heinrich Himmler. Stop all actions against the Jews until Germany regains the offensive. Eichmann fumed. With the Red Army only 50 miles away, Raoul Wallenberg wrote a hopeful letter to his mother. When the Soviets come, I'll try to return home in 8 days. But things took a dramatic turn. The Red Army's offensive stalled, as they had overextended themselves. The Germans, hardened and desperate, pushed the Soviets back by 100 miles. Then, in mid-October, a coup reshaped Hungary's political landscape. The Arrow Cross Party, Hungary's fanatical Nazi collaborators, seized power. Eichmann saw his chance. Senior officials of the new regime were highly anti-Semitic. He persuaded them to pull out 2,000 Jews from their homes daily. They were herded into columns and forced to march 120 miles west to the Austrian border. There, they will be used as slave labor if they survived the journey. In other words, it was the death march. The conditions were merciless. Men, women, and children were driven forward at gunpoint. Those who stumbled, weakened by starvation or illness, were shot on the spot. The roads became littered with bodies, a grim testament to Eichmann's unwavering cruelty. One of the marchers was Susan Tabor, a young schoolgirl. On one morning of the march, Susan awoke in the factory she and the marchers had been corralled in the night before. In the dim light filtering through the factory entrance, she saw a figure emerge. Small, frail, and almost delicate, unlike the brutal soldiers around him. At first, she thought she was imagining him, but the man's voice broke through the haze of hopelessness. He spoke with calm authority, and slowly, his words began to sink in. It was Raoul Wallenberg. Susan stared at him, almost unable to believe what she was hearing. He told them he had negotiated with the Nazis for the release of those who held Schutzpasses. As he spoke, he moved among the crowd, slipping extra Schutzpasses when the guards weren't looking. And then, even more astonishingly, he distributed food and medical supplies. Raoul, frail in appearance but strong in resolve, was giving them hope. Susan felt something new stir within her. Wallenberg's presence was more than just a reprieve from the nightmare they were living. It was a reminder of their humanity. He looked at them not as broken creatures or a lost cause, but as people, as human beings worth saving. Susan would later say that Wallenberg had given them back something no one else could. Her dignity. He made her feel like she mattered. And in that moment, the factory felt a little less dark. And thanks to Wallenberg's intervention, as many as 200 of the marchers that day were saved. But Eichmann did not want to concede one Jew to Wallenberg. One evening later that month, as Wallenberg approached his apartment, he was startled to see the infamous Nazi officer standing at the entrance. Wallenberg hadn't expected him, yet in a move of calculated composure, he invited Eichmann inside. Over dinner, the two adversaries engaged in tense conversation. Wallenberg asked, "Why not end this madness and leave while you still can?" Eichmann responded with cold certainty, "For me, there's no escape, no liberation. I'll continue until the end. And when I finally face the gallows, I'll die knowing I succeeded in my mission." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. As Eichmann rose to leave, he paused at the door, turning back to Wallenberg with a sinister smile. "Don't think your diplomatic passport will save you. Even a neutral diplomat can have an unfortunate accident." The veiled threat sent a chill down Wallenberg's spine. He realized then that Eichmann was not just a cog in the Nazi machine, but a man fully committed to his monstrous cause. From that night on, Wallenberg made sure to find new hiding places to sleep, rotating among them every few nights. Eichmann's shadow loomed large over him. But Wallenberg soldiered on with his work. just as effectively as before. Indeed, his finest hour came at the point of his greatest vulnerability, in a room he wasn't even present in. By early January, the Soviets had encircled Budapest. As the early evening shadows crept across Budapest, Aerocross officer Sharlai noticed a policeman running towards the deserted town hall, raising Sharlai's suspicion. With authority in his voice, Sharlai demanded to know what had caused such urgency. The policeman, pale and trembling, hesitated before blurting out the horrific news. 500 German soldiers and 22 Aerocross men. They are about to massacre every Jew in the Budapest ghetto. Sharlai's heart skipped a beat. The ghetto, overcrowded and starving, was home to 70,000 Jews. But the policeman had bumped into the right person. Sharlai was no longer a mere Aerocross official. By now, he had become Raoul Wallenberg's informant, risking his own life to save others. Without hesitation, Sharlai relayed the dire news. Wallenberg's face hardened as he heard the plan for the massacre. He knew they had to act quickly. Without missing a beat, Wallenberg told Sharlai to seek an urgent audience with German General Gerhard Schmidhuber. He knew the only chance of stopping the massacre lay with the general, a man whose command over the German forces could halt the impending bloodshed. Sharlai did as instructed, finding Schmidhuber in his office. He sat down and delivered Wallenberg's ultimatum. Wallenberg says that if you do not stop this, he will ensure that you are charged with murder and genocide by the War Crimes Tribunal. Schmidhuber stared at Sharlai, the weight of the threat sinking in. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, without a word, Schmidhuber picked up the phone and summoned the garrison commander to his office. When the officer arrived, Schmidhuber arrested him, stopping the massacre before it could begin. Today, the descendants of these 70,000 Jews owe their lives to the courageous actions of Raoul Wallenberg. Among them, the family of US Congressman Tom Lantos, who serves as a powerful testament to Wallenberg's enduring legacy. I wish the story ended here, but as Budapest celebrated its liberation, Raoul Wallenberg faced a different fate. In a cruel twist of fate, the Soviets arrested Wallenberg, something no Nazi had done. Suspicious of Wallenberg's altruism and fluent German, they couldn't comprehend a man risking everything for strangers without expecting something in return. To them, Wallenberg's selflessness was a must. He must be a spy. And so, the man who had outwitted the Nazis, saved tens of thousands, and defied death itself, was swallowed by the shadows of history. He disappeared into the labyrinth of Soviet prisons, never to be seen again. Meanwhile, Wallenberg's uncles, Jacob and Marcus, flourished. While Raoul was risking his life, they prospered, their business links with the Nazis adding to their wealth and comfort long after the war. The irony is chilling. The man who sacrificed everything is lost to history, while those who compromise with evil thrived. This troubling truth raises a deeper question, one we must all confront. How do we foster a world where people do good not for personal gain, but because it is the right thing to do? How do we inspire more Raoul Wallenbergs, whose courage and conviction come not from the promise of reward, but from the belief that hope and humanity are worth fighting for? Thanks for watching this video.